Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. We're a father-son business podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems like time management when rugby season kicks off after you've had 3 months off. Camden, how's that time management coming along today?
I full disclosure on this, that rainstorm that left over from Hurricane Hillary over in California, we got rained out yesterday, so I got a nice few extra hours on work, so that was really nice. But yeah, it's gonna be a little tight here, but that's all right. That's half the fun of it, right?
That's right. That's right. And talking about time management, a woman who is all over the map, and I'm always amazed every time I talk to her how many balls she's got in the air. And there's an inside joke from where you and I were met for that also, but maybe we'll get to that. But Ms. Lara Jones, golly, see, I told you, I knew this would happen.
Every time I ask how to say
Every
someone's name.
time we talk about how to say somebody's name, I mess it up. Lara. I'm so
Lara
Lara.
Lara
You're
Jones.
overthinking it
There
now,
you go.
I know my Texas wants to come out so hard and just call you Laura.
No, do not call me Laura. No you. There's no you, Otis. There's no you. It's just Lara. Lara.
I know. There's no you. It's all me, right? So
That's right.
So, man, now that I'm flubbed up all over the place, I want to know. Talk about changing speeds and directions. You were a super successful corporate executive. I'll call you executive. I mean, maybe you didn't have the seed label in front of it, but you were kicking ass in that world. And you said, "Nope, time out. That's enough. I'm going over here. I want to do it on my own." What happened there? What drove you to that independence?
Well, Otis, is a great question. And I'm going to start here. Look, I didn't want to be the expert in grit, right? But after many traumas in my timeline, including my youngest son passing away, nearly losing my life the same night, came to this, foreign country. I wanted to leave a traumatized past behind, and I had nothing except a laptop and a brain. I didn't know when my next meal would be. And I didn't even know where I was going to sleep some nights. And that's when I realized, Otis, that I had something that most do not, and that is grit. But I'm not just talking about the word grit itself. I'm actually talking about a system that I've created around GRIT, which is grit, which is featured in my book, Hunt or Be Hunted, that literally saved my life. And so when I came to this country, it was a decision that I made because I wanted to choose my grit. Because at some point, grit is going to choose you. And I believe that if you can choose your grit before grit chooses you, that's where you start to build up your resilience and the strength that you need in order to get through adversity. Because at some point, it's going to find you.
Could you talk a little bit about what you mean by that, of it finding you versus, like, I'm guessing you mean you get thrown into a crappy situation, you find the grit where it's like, you can still have that versus being proactive. Is that right there? Kind of a proactive versus reactive?
In other words, like, adversity is going to find you at some point in your life. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. You're going to have something that knocks you down in life, whether you find yourself divorced, whether you lose your job, whether you lose a loved one. Whatever that looks like for you, the grit is going to find you at some point. And so what I'm saying is, what if you could choose your grit before it chose you? I mean, here's the thing. The most important attribute in leadership is grit. And there's a myth that it can't be taught and it's something you're born with. But the truth is, it can be taught. And I show people how, I do this for a living every day, but I walk them through a proven system that highlights their strengths and grit. And it reveals the areas that need improvement. So I actually provide the tools, in how to do so. So I get to choose my grit because I didn't get to choose. And what if you could choose your grit before it chooses you? You know, wouldn't you feel more in control? You know, there's so many leaders that I work with that feel that they're just not getting the respect that they deserve, and therefore they're not getting the results that they desire with themselves and with their team, and they feel stuck. And the truth is they don't have a system that works with dealing with multiple different personalities, you know, that usually serve in leadership. And so when you bring those leaders together to make a decision, it's painful. And often a decision is delayed, or it doesn't get made, or the wrong decision is made. And so one of my favorite things to do is work with companies to teach my system surrounding the most important attribute of leadership, which is grit. And I do that, you know, through speaking, workshops, performance programs, and it unlocks the doors to all the other hallmarks of leadership.
How did you get to that point where it's all right? I figured out myself, but now I'm going to get on a stage and share with other people.
That epiphany came to me the night my son died, and the same night that I almost lost my life. And as I was laying in the hospital bed and the machines are beeping, every flash, every beep, the number on the blood pressure machine was lower and lower and lower and lower. And it's at that moment that I realized I was going to die. I knew I was going to die. I'd seen this before. My grandmother passed away with her blood pressure plummeting. And I said to myself, all right, Lara, well, you have a choice. You have a choice. Number one, you either accept it and you die. Or number two, you accept the fact that you can't control your physical body, but you can control how you think about it and how you manage it from here on out with the last few seconds you have. And trust me, this is going around my mind like it's a million miles an hour. It's not as slow as what I'm saying now. And in that moment, I said to myself, all right, they're going to resuscitate me. They're going to bring me back to life because they have to. Because A, I'm too young. B, I needed to get home to my living children that are at home. They were only 2.5 and 1 year old at the time. And see, I wasn't allowed to let my husband remarry and have someone else bring up my children. So that was a big motivator for me. I was like, I'm gonna stay alive. You know, I'm gonna fight for my life. And I had this epiphany as I was laying there, and my organs were shutting down one by one. I could feel like my vision was going, my hearing was going, my speech just started to slur, and I couldn't press the button. I couldn't press the button for the nurse. And I sat bolt upright, and I just looked at my husband dead in the eyes, and I said, get me water, I'm going to die. And he just said, you can't have water, you're going to have surgery. And I said, get me water, I'm going to die. And I tried to yell out nurse as best I could. I mean, even in my moments of dying, my husband's arguing with me, but he doesn't understand that I can feel I'm dying, but he's not realizing, you know, this in that moment. The nurse comes running in, and all of a sudden that's when my blood pressure was plummeting. And she's screaming, emergency blood transfusion, emergency blood transfusion. And, you know, I'm bleeding internally. And they hadn't caught that. They hadn't monitored that. And as the blood pressure is plummeting and I'm, you know, saying my goodbyes to my husband, that's when I had this moment of clarity. And I transported my brain into, you know, the rooms, like one of the bedrooms back at home where my boys were. And I tried the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique where I said, okay, what's the 5 things I can see? What's the 4 things that I can hear? What's the 3 things I can feel? What's the 2 things that I can smell? And what's the 1 thing that I can taste? And as I did that, I said to myself, and I was with my boys, I said, okay, if you make it through this, Lara, you're going to make a vow to yourself that if I can impact at least one person for at least one day, for every day I'm breathing, and that's what I'm going to do if I make it through this. And that's when I had that epiphany, and I knew that I had to get my message out and story out to so many others. And at that point, it almost didn't matter like what I'd been through prior to that. It was it was that very, very moment that I just said, enough is enough. I gotta do something with my story. I gotta do something with the fact that this has happened. And I'm sure this, has happened not just to me, but to many others out there. And what is it about me that's different that I can attribute, particularly in leadership, to show others that even in your darkest, darkest moments, you go to that dark place. How do you get through that? You just got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's not for me. Mm-hmm. It's for my son. And I wanted to do it for others.
Talking about making that impact on others, you said something that I think we've talked about a handful of times on the show, which is that one person trying to, the way I've always talked about it is like, if this is what I got, I want to give that to one person to give them what I got out of this. And you think about that one person, but then there becomes an interesting thing when you think about it in the entrepreneurial sense of amplifying that. How did you move from that one person to 10 people, 100 people? Thousands of people? It's like, I'm not just looking at the one person, I'm trying to scale this impact beyond that.
Yeah. Well, I realized that it's more than just one person that goes through something like this. And I realized that it's more than just, sometimes in life, like you come across others that are similar to you, but there's so many more out there that are not similar to you because they don't have the belief, right? So if I feel really strong in one particular area and somebody doesn't feel as strong as that, or vice versa, then how do you get that message out to them? It's not just one person. There's so many others that don't. I'm a big believer that people have this grit inside them, but they just don't have the tools to unlock it. They don't know how to. And so when people come to me and they say, look, we've got, when I've got companies come to me and they say, I've got, issues with communication or emotional intelligence, that can absolutely be taught, right? Or decision making, or in recruitment. Like there's so many different areas in leadership that can be taught, but a lot of people think that grit can't be, and so that's why I attribute it to be the number one. And I want to get this message out to so many, because just imagine if we all had those tools to be able to understand what the process is of grit. And this is actually, I talk about this in my book, that, 10 years ago, I think it was, that, Angela Duckworth came out with grit is, about passion and perseverance. And I've been thinking about that a lot, in great detail. And I want to challenge that and take it much deeper, because you can have passion, but maybe not the perseverance, because you don't know how. Right? Or you're in your comfort zone, you get into that fear zone, and then you don't have the correct tools. So therefore you don't know how to continue to persevere. So you run back to the comfort zone. And those that have perseverance, they may not have identified what their passion is yet. And so here's the thing. If you've got passion, you can learn perseverance. If you've got perseverance, but you don't have a passion, that's a whole different discussion, right? It's a different discussion. But what I like to do, and I love to do this again through speaking and workshops and performance programs and so forth, and I do this with a lot of companies, is I like to teach them the GRIT system. And so the G is get it done. The R is reframe thinking. The I is impact others, and the T is take responsibility. Now, I didn't just come up with those out of nowhere, right? This is through much research. It's through my own experience, and it's also through interviewing many, many others, former NFL players, former boxing worldwide champions, military, and other, successful CEOs and executives in the corporate world. But I truly believe that grit can absolutely be taught, and it is 100% necessary. If you're an aspiring leader, even if you're a seasoned leader, if your team does not have the correct tools in how to understand and unlock grit in leadership, then they might feel a little lost. They might think, well, you either have it or you don't. And I don't believe that. I think everybody has it within them. They just need to be around what I call their culture of excellence. They have to surround themselves with others. They're going to lift them up when they fall, because it will happen at some point, right? It's like, look at the Serengeti. You got the lions out there, right? If you're a little injured lamb in the Serengeti, you're going to get eaten. But if you're a lion that's injured, the other lions are going to pick you back up again, right? They're going to protect you. They're going to protect that pride. And that's what I talk about when I, discuss much, whether it's in my speaking or workshops or, in my programs, where I talk about that culture of excellence and how you develop that and how you define that. And that actually leads to a lot of, regaining training and retaining top talent as well, because that's a big issue right now amongst companies.
How did you go from the one-to-one sort of thing, right? I want to help one person to the one-to-many, right? Because, I mean, you've told us a little bit about your story and the catalyst, which is a deeply personal thing. To share that with a bunch of strangers is a huge, huge undertaking. It's one thing to do, hey, Lara, you and I, let's chat, right? We're having a cup of coffee or a beer or whatever. We're chatting about it and sharing that. That's one thing. But to get up on stage in front of a lot of people, hundreds of people, and share that same thing, that's a mindset. How'd you come to that mindset shift to make that a comfortable thing to do?
Well, Otis, it's a great question. And my number one value is authenticity. You've got to be yourself, because there's so many out there that, perhaps they feel this shame or, embarrassment of, well, I'm not sure if I can share this because what's the repercussions going to be? Well, what would be the repercussions if I didn't share this? It's like, I want to change lives. I can save lives this way too, but it's not just about, in the business world, but it's also outside of that. It's everything that I talk about and teach and educate others in. Your personal life and your business life are intermixed. And so when I went through my trauma after that night of losing Jack, my son, and nearly losing my life, it wasn't an instant thing. It wasn't like it was just suddenly, okay, right, well, now I've got a duty. It was, it took me 4 months. It took me 4 months. I was in a very, very, very dark space, right? And it took me 4 months to realize that I woke up one day and I said, wow, I woke up. I'm incredibly grateful. And it was in that moment as well. I mean, I've had a few of these epiphanies, right? But it was in that particular moment that I remember as clear as day, as if it was yesterday, getting out of bed and saying, I'm going to put some makeup on today. I'm going to present myself well today. I'm going to show up for others today. And I took a brave step. I actually went to a support group for mothers that had lost children. I wasn't interested to do that before because I was too much in my dark space. And when I went there, I realized that I had this sense of light within me that, my gosh, I can't change what's happened, but I can shape today in order to get somewhere closer where I want to be tomorrow. Whether that's even, like I mentioned, just getting up, putting on some makeup for the day, or getting up, having a shower, getting up, putting on some clothes, like the little wins that might seem like we take that for granted. That was a huge thing for me back then. And I realized that I didn't want to pretend to be someone I wasn't. And so in those 4 months, I tried to hide my grief. I tried to hide my trauma. And when I allowed myself to feel that, it's almost like I released the chains. I just said, you know what? Authenticity is absolutely so critical, especially in this day and age, because you see all over social media and people are comparing themselves to others and all this other thing. And it's like, I'm out there saying, listen, it's okay to not be okay. And when I started showing that vulnerability, and I did this, in the business setting, obviously, because I speak about this, the connection with the audience was so immense, because even though they may not have had a tragedy similar to what I've just gone through, they've had some other type of tragedy in their life. Perhaps they've just gone through a horrible divorce. And maybe it wasn't of their choosing. Maybe it was of their choosing. Maybe there's children involved. Maybe, they've had a huge fight with a loved one. Well, however you are outside of the business and your personal life, it is going to shape your mind and your mindset of how you are in the workplace. And so I just knew that with my story, although I'd start talking about it one-on-one with people during those 4 months, I realized that when I kind of stepped into my purpose and I gave myself permission to live my purpose, and I gave myself that permission to share my story with others, here's the thing. It wasn't about me. It was about everybody that I could impact. Everybody that I could impact. That's the I in my GRIT system, by the way. That's how that was developed. But that's where I think, many can go wrong, because they think, well, I can't share this because I feel shame, or, I feel vulnerable, and to show vulnerability is to show weakness. You couldn't be further from the truth. To show vulnerability is to show strength.
I'm curious. And I'm piecing this together because it's something that I know I've definitely dealt with in my own personal performance. Of when there's one thing to display that vulnerability, but then there's also a source of confidence that comes into the performance itself, of literally getting up on stage and having enough confidence to literally go stand there in front of people. And I'm curious, how do you connect those? Because really what I'm getting at is that performance, you're drawing on something, but then the vulnerability can kind of almost decay at that thing that you're drawing on. So I'm curious, how do you square those two? Because when you tie a lot of weight to your performance, when you have a purpose tied to your performance, that adds even more weight to it. To use the term resistance, you have even more resistance because it's so important to you. But then that extra weight makes it harder to perform. So how do you still have that balance of vulnerability, but having the ability to perform at a high level?
So I actually don't think that having the vulnerability is a negative factor to. I think it's a powerful strength to have. So I use it as a fuel to fire me rather than something that's going to consume me. So here's the thing. I'm not motivated by fear. I'm motivated by my duty. This is a duty that I have to share with others. It would be selfish of me not to do that when I've discovered it through all of my traumas. And so when I'm up on stage and I'm speaking, or if I'm in front of, corporate leaders, or, at an executive retreat, or at an event, or whatever it may be, right? If I'm in front of a group of leaders, aspiring, seasoned, all the leaders in between, when I share my story, it's to create that connection, because I want them to understand that I'm human too, right? And that I understand that as human beings, we do go through tough times. We have emotion and we have logic. And, half of us are very logical thinkers, half of us are emotional in terms of when you make decisions. However, if you can merge the two together and you tap into both sides, you become a powerhouse. And that's what I want to educate in leaders. It's like, you got to utilize the emotional side of what makes us brilliant as humans and not look at it as a negative. That's one of the biggest problems that I come up against when I'm in front of teams and so forth. It's that, there's certain individuals or certain leaders that just, want to get it done. And I understand, I'm that way. I just want to get things done. And, you're in a very fast pace. But equally, you've got others in the team that you need. You can't just forget them or expect them to do it the way that you want them to do it. And therefore, by utilizing the emotions in a positive way rather than seeing it as a negative can be very powerful. And that's why I share that part of my story. So it's making that connection with the audience on an emotional front, but showing them that using the steps that I have, like through the logic and so forth, that you can get to a very powerful answer, whatever decisions that you're trying to make in that moment.
How did you get to the storytelling? And really what I'm curious about on that is what was the origin? Did you have family members that used to tell stories, or some friends, or or did it just start to come out as you made that decision, I need to help more people? How did the storytelling aspect of it come about?
Well, when I was the age of 4, I was asked by my parents, what do you want to be when you grow up? And instead of turning around and saying like a doctor or a nurse, which, many of my friends at that age would say, I turned around and I said, CEO. And I think, at the time, a lot of people were probably like, what is she talking about? But I've had this vision in my mind since I was a little girl that the reason I wanted to become like a CEO is because I wanted to lead.
Mm-hmm.
And that leadership came from just feeling like there's a lot of things that happen in life that I kind of look at differently. I reframe a lot of how I look at situations, and I was doing that from a young child. And I realized as well, through storytelling, you make so many connections, like with the audience or with the person that you're talking with. But I grew up listening to a lot of stories, and that really impacted me. I listened to the stories my friends told me. I listened to stories that I would hear on the television. I would read a lot. I read a lot. I read a lot of stories, and not fiction stories. I used to read a lot of factual stories that happened, and I was just fascinated with how people dealt, with certain situations and why others dealt with it differently. And so that really sparked an interest. And that's how I got into understanding more about the brain and how it operates and so forth. And that led to my training in neuroscience and obviously psychology and mental health counseling and so forth. And I was just so fascinated with, why do people think some ways and other people think a different way? And storytelling itself is kind of the connection, right? It's, even if you're a logical thinker, you're an emotional thinker, right? Or you base decisions on emotion. The one common denominator between the two is that everybody loves to talk, right? They love to tell their story. And so storytelling is really the connection between the logical thinker and the emotional thinker.
Talking about that connection, it makes me think actually of really important thing in all sciences and all fields of study really is you have the people who are the heavy academic and can speak all of the jargon, and then there's a need to disseminate that jargon to the other people out there. One, so they can understand some of it and apply it to their life, but two, because that inspires the next generation. I think that's the more important piece there. Could you talk a little bit about your experience and the storytelling aspect? Because, I mean, come on, neuroscience, like, yeah, I'm sure when we start talking jargon, and I always like the joke of $5 words, you got some $20 words, I bet. So how do you help to translate that through story to help people to get inspired and to understand these kind of things?
I say it in a way that if a 5-year-old can't understand me with what I'm saying, then I'm not going to say it. Because here's the thing. No matter whether it's science-based or, whatever other field, whether you're in tech or whatever, if you start using language, and you've got to obviously understand who your audience is, first of all, when you're talking to them. But if you start to use language that the audience isn't going to resonate with, they're going to switch off because they won't have a clue. And they won't understand what it is you're talking about. And I don't want that. I want to have a connection with my audience. So, if I'm talking to a neuroscientist, then of course I'm going to use the language that I've learned and understood. If I'm talking to an audience that, might be in, say, trying to think of an industry example here. I was about to say healthcare.
Bunch of Army guys.
Yeah, although military do understand.
They get one step lower and go to the Marines. I mean,
hey, be careful now. My husband's a Marine. I root for our Marines. I got a good friend who's just about to go to boot camp as well. So I'm like, I root for our Marines. But if I'm talking to an audience that, maybe isn't adverse to that type of language, then I want to keep it simple. I mean, I'll be honest, like I like to keep things simple anyway when I'm speaking with anybody, because we have this tendency to try and overcomplicate matters. And some do it to try and sound more intelligent. Others do it because they feel that that's what the other person wants to hear. just be yourself, just be authentic, and speak in a manner that no matter whether you're a scientist or maybe you're in the arts or, whatever else, you want to make sure that they understand what it is that you're saying. And here's the thing. Everybody decodes information differently. So however I'm encoding my thoughts into language, that person could be decoding it in a way that is different to how you're encoding it, right? In other words, what I think comes out in language, like in words, and what I'm saying, they are interpreting in a completely different manner because they think differently to you. And I think that's actually one of the most fundamental problems that I come across when I'm with companies and I'm in the leadership program delivering this with organizations and in workshops and so forth, or even in my speaking. And I have people come up to me afterwards and it's like, well, how do we overcome this communication issue? And the biggest thing is you've got to understand, are they left brain thinking? Are they right brain thinking? Are they a slow pace? Are they a fast pace? How do they like to interpret the language? Are they more emotional? Are they more logical? And so once you start to kind of understand the basics and the fundamentals of how, like our makeup, if you will, it's going to make it a heck of a lot easier when you're speaking with that particular individual or when you're trying to address a team. And that's why when I'm speaking or when I'm in front of, a group of 30 leaders or 200 leaders, that I have to understand who the audience is. And so I do a lot of research beforehand, obviously ask a lot of questions and, really want to identify, okay, who are the people that are sitting in front of me? How do they think? And there's always going to be that mixture, right? But, and you can't please everybody, but in the same breath as a leader, it's your responsibility to ensure that you're communicating in a way that they understand, because perception is reality. So it doesn't matter how you think that you're coming across. It matters how you're coming across to that person, how you're being perceived by that person. Remember, it's not about you, it's about them.
This episode of the Cam and Otis Show is brought to you by Evergood Adventure Wine.
Our loyal listeners know Evergood's founder, Matthew Hexter, and our good friend. From his appearances on the show, they have never disappointed. And Evergood Adventure Wines doesn't disappoint either.
No, it doesn't. Evergood is a craft winery from Colorado that makes wine from lemons, not grapes.
That's right. Picture this, adult lemonade.
Oh yeah, perfect for your next backyard barbecue or hanging out with friends at the beach or the pool. No need to drink a warm red grape wine when it's 100 degrees out or much hotter here in Tucson. Evergood over ice is the perfect refreshment for a hot summer day.
And they come in a variety of flavors, including lemon, strawberry, lime, my favorite for margaritas, grapefruit, and watermelon, which comes in a cool pouch, by the way. These non-carbonated wines check all the boxes. Gluten-free, vegan, low sugar, and low in sulfites. Best of all, they taste damn good, and they have fun names too.
Yeah, like their OG lemon wine called Skierpy. Yeah, y'all heard that one right, Skierpy. And I'll tell you, Skierpy is also one of my favorites.
Evergood now ships to 41 states, so you can order your lemon wines online at evergoodadventurewines.com.
Plus, Matthew is being kind enough to offer 20% off for all of our listeners. Just use promo code CAM-OTIS at checkout to get 20% off and start enjoying these amazing lemon wines.
So y'all go to evergoodadventurewines.com or click the link in the description in the show. Click Buy Now to redeem your Cam and Otis Show exclusive discount. So how did you go from... we've kind of taken the steps, and now you're on a stage, and all of a sudden,
I was going to say I could hear a pin drop there.
Yeah, there's occasional pauses that we're getting in our sunspot.
I was going to say, talking about authenticity and vulnerability. Yeah, Riverside's being a little buggy right now.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
What I was getting
shows
to
it's real.
Is, how did you, or what, or when? I'm going to leave this wide open for you. It went from you talking with one to talking with many to all of a sudden I can do this. This is a business, and the business, the backside of what's behind the curtain while you're on the stage. How did you shift into that world? and go, oh crap, this is what I'm going to do. This is me. This is 4-year-old Lara, now CEO Lara. How do I do that?
Well, I was a CEO before I lost my son. So when I came to this country, I had nothing except a laptop and a brain and a few clothes. And so I said to myself, this is it. Like, I'm choosing this grit because I want to make sure that no matter what happens in my life, and I'd obviously been through some traumas beforehand, but no matter what happens in my life, if I can make it through some of the hardest times that I know I'm about to face, I know I can face anything that life throws at me. And what's the biggest thing that is human beings that we need, right? It's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to have security, right? Food, the basic needs, food, water, shelter. Well, I was putting myself in a situation where I didn't have any of that. There were certain moments during that time period when I was in America. It wasn't always that way, but there were certain time periods when I was in America through some decisions that I made that put me in that situation. I chose rent over food. And the reason being is I didn't think I'd last a night out on the streets, right? But I can last 2 weeks without food. Human beings can last 2 weeks without food. And so that's when the business was born. It's Be a Legend, right? I had my nickname in the UK was the legend for a company that I worked for. And here's the thing a lot of people don't understand is I left a comfortable life in England. I didn't have to do what I did. I didn't have to put myself through that grit. I chose to. And I chose to for some very good reasons. I was unhappy when I was in England. I was very unhappy. And so I said to myself, I've got to change this. And so any money that I'd earned and everything that I'd sold, I put it away so I couldn't touch it. So I had nothing. So I forced myself to literally start from scratch again. And I was in my early 30s. And so many people at that point, thought I was nuts because, I'd built a career up and it's like, why are you throwing all of this away? And I didn't see it as throwing it away. I saw it as such an amazing opportunity to start again and do something so fresh and so bold that, wow, if I can do this, I can do anything. And so the company was born and, created Be a Legend. And I worked so hard. I mean, talk about grit. There were times, I was sleeping on the floor at some point. I was sleeping on like this rickety old couch at one point, sort of bouncing around different couches from friends that I'd made. It was not a great way to live, right? But in the same breath, I was grateful that I even had this opportunity that I created. And so I never looked at it as a negative. I just looked at it as, okay, I'm in my fear zone. I'm going to some, deeper places. I'm going to keep pushing through because that's how you get into the learning zone. And when you're in that learning zone, that's when the magic happens, right? And the changes start to happen in your brain and you can get through into your growth zone that way. So I had this business and, we have a marketing branch of the business and I was coaching to begin with. And then the marketing just took off in such a huge way. And there were so many companies that needed that help. And I just scaled it. I just grew it, and hired and was able to scale that. But I realized that my passion was still in people. Like it really was in people and in companies and helping teams. I was a very, very successful VP of sales over in England. And I was, again, my background is sales and leadership. And I had all the tools and the skills to know how to enhance performance in others. So, but my focus had shifted because I was focused on scaling the marketing side of the business. And I realized this wasn't my absolute passion. I hired great people and it was their passion and they did a phenomenal job. But my passion still lay in people and helping them and helping teams and helping enhance performance and helping people believe in themselves. And that was when I realized that after I lost my son and nearly my life, it was like a light bulb just went off in me and said, the time is now. If you don't do this now, you're never going to do it. And I had to make that switch in my head. Now I still have the marketing branch of my business and it's a huge part of Be a Legend and who they are today. But, me personally, I fly all over the country, with keynote speaking, with workshops, with the performance programs. And I work with not just leaders, with C-suite leaders. I work with aspiring leaders. I've worked with some very, very big names out there, some Fortune 50 companies. And I also work with sales teams. And it doesn't really matter who it is I'm working with per se. It matters to me that, have I made a difference in their performance? Am I enhancing their performance, not just in business, but in life? Because the two are married. And anyone that, says differently, I will challenge that, because who you are inside the workplace is going to affect what you do outside the workplace. Who you are outside the workplace affects who you are inside the workplace, and vice versa. It's why when trauma happens, we're not as effective in the business place if we don't have tools in how to manage that, right? Because you're not a robot. You can't just switch it off. So you have to understand how to, one, be self-aware, and second, self-regulate those emotions so you can use them as a power tool, and as a positive, not as a negative. And when that night happened and it was in 2021, when that night happened in 2021, it wasn't like an instant decision for me. No, it didn't immediately happen. It took me, 4 months, as I mentioned earlier, for me to kind of realize how I wanted to go about that and how I wanted to use that story that was so powerful in a positive way, rather than look at it as, oh my gosh, look what happened to me. It was more like, look what happened for me. And I also said, instead of look what happened to me, I'd often say, look what revealed me. And just that one word in the sentence can change everything. And that's how I went from being CEO of Be a Legend to a leadership performance expert that's now using her purpose to help so many others enhance their performance, to become better leaders, to become, better individuals in their own right, to be able to really get the promotion that they want. Or if you're a seasoned leader, to learn how to ensure that your team are leading in a way that you're proud of, and that you're going to walk alongside them. They're not going to follow you, because that's management, right? There's a difference between management and leadership. And I really want to instill that leadership quality in individuals and have them understand that, look, your people, your team, they're going to go through some type of adversity at some point in their life, and you can't just write that off. No matter how small it might be to you, no matter how large it might be to them, you can't ignore it. And that's where, my GRIT system that I created really does come into play. And obviously, in leadership, in the programs I deliver, I have a lot of different modules and topics and so forth, because they're all very important, like decision-making, emotional intelligence, communication, impact, accountability. All of those are incredibly important. Retention, recruitment, revenue. But the core, and I'm going to come back to it again and again and again, but the core is that grit, and utilizing that grit system to be able to enhance the performance in others. And actually, it's featured in the Hunnell Be Hunted book, but the grit system, actually, there's something else I created called the grit type indicator. But like, you've heard of the Myers-Briggs indicator. This is called the grit type indicator. And you take the assessment, and then you're able to see which grit type you are. So you've got the 4 elements of grit, you'll be able to see which grit type you are. And then from that, you can then identify, okay, where are the other areas of grit that I perhaps need a little work on, or I want to enhance, in those areas, so I can use all of the areas of grit in a very powerful way and teach that to my team. And so that's where, I help unlock a lot of that potential, and obviously give tools and strategies and so forth for that.
We've talked a lot about storytelling and your story. I'm really curious if you could help to give some advice to people out there about telling their story, and then the revising of the story as you go. And because what I mean is, you talked about when you're 4 years old, you knew what you wanted to do. Obviously, things changed between now and then, and you kept the story the same, but you made the changes you need to. Could you talk a little bit about being able to find that balance?
Yeah, I had this vision from when I was very young, and I just never let it go. Now, obviously, there was a lot that happened in that time frame, and there were moments where I thought, well, how do I make it? How do I get to that? And here's the thing: so many will focus on the end goal rather than focus on the process in which to get there. And something that, I educate a lot on, and Otis, I think you actually heard it, when you saw me speak before, but you've got to understand the process of how to get to that goal. And it's not about the outcome, but it's the journey, right, in which you get there. And so one thing that I will always say to anybody is you've got to look at what are the habits that you're doing. What are the good habits? What are the good habits that you need to create in order to carry out the tasks that you have to do, whether that's daily or weekly, to be able to get to that end goal. So in other words, what the habits are that you're doing today is going to shape how your ability and how you carry out the task that is ultimately going to get you that step closer every day to getting to your goal. Now, with my background and my history and so forth, it wasn't plain sailing. Like, it wasn't just age of 4, I wanted to be a CEO, and by the age of 21, I was a CEO, right? But I realized that even at the age of 17, I turned around to my head of sixth form teacher, which is high school, right? And I said to him, I was kind of pulled into his office, and he said, "Lara, why are you not attending general studies?" And I said, "Well, I've looked this up and I've done my research, and general studies isn't actually counted towards the point system to get into college. So if you can give me a good reason as to why I should be going to general studies and wasting an hour of my day every day studying a subject that isn't going to get me to my goal, but rather take me away from extra study on the subjects that will get me to my goal, then I'm all ears." And you could literally hear a pin drop. But I think what I created in that moment was actually respect, because he realized that, well, she's actually right. There is logic behind that. And I'll be quite honest, after that, a lot of my fellow students and so forth are like, "How did you do that?" And then it was almost like I created this, well, we don't want to be doing general studies. And I'm sure the teachers, disliked me at that point. But the thing is, like, here's the thing. I kind of had some foresight with, I knew what I had to do to get me to where I needed to be. And going to, wasting an hour of my day on a subject that wasn't going to help me get to where I needed to be, I saw as a complete waste. And I wasn't going to allow him or anybody else to tell me otherwise, because I was the CEO of my own life at that point. And, quite frankly, that subject turned out to be something called Google later on, right? So I don't think, I didn't hurt myself by doing that. But the fact being is that when you start looking at things differently, and it doesn't matter what comes your way, because there's going to be so many things that throw you off your guard. There was some terrible things that happened to me as a teenager. There's terrible things that happened to me in my 20s. It's everybody goes through something in their life, right? It's not about me, it's about them, but it's everyone goes through something. And how you handle that situation, how you approach it, is going to make the difference between you running back to your comfort zone when you're in that fear zone, or pushing through and getting into the learning zone. And I went into the learning zone that day because I realized that, wow, I just stood up to the head of sixth form. He was a really nice guy. Don't get me wrong, nice guy. But I stood up to him, and I could have, there could have been some consequences to that. But I believed so passionately in my argument with that it didn't matter if he was going to expel me from the school. Like, I absolutely 100% had this conviction and belief that what I was doing was the right thing, because it allowed me extra time to study the subjects to get into college and what I'm passionate about. So, it's the path is never smooth sailing. It's going to be up and down. It's going to be rocky, but you've got to stay true to who you are. And that's the biggest piece of advice I can give to anybody is, no matter whether you think you can't, you can. But just remember, with every success comes 10,000 failures. 10,000. When I came to this country and said I wanted to, create that role of being a CEO, that I wanted to make that goal happen, I didn't want to become a CEO because I wanted, fancy clothes or fast cars or any of that other stuff, right? That was all material stuff to me. It was more about the impact I was going to have on others and the leadership that I knew that I had, that I wanted to teach and educate others. And that emotional intelligence piece as well, because oh my gosh, it's a game changer. Once you understand and you're self-aware and you regulate those emotions and you understand how to apply it in a social situation, whether that's in business with teams or whether that's outside, that's where the magic happens. Because like I said, you've got logical thinkers, you've got emotional individuals that make decisions based on those emotions. And so you've got to learn how to marry the two and have that connection. So.
This episode of the Cam and Otis Show is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose.
Are you tired of dealing with the cost of bad leadership? It's time to make a change.
The Green Beret Leadership Program is your key to unlocking the full potential of your team.
By using GBLP to develop leaders in your business, you'll get a proactive and responsible team that embraces challenges, takes calculated risks, and takes action without constant supervision.
Developing great leaders can take a lot of time and energy. And that's why businesses tend to opt for the trial by fire and the school of hard knocks path to leadership. The truth is that wastes time and money. And folks, there's never enough of either one of those, and puts lots of extra stress on your leadership team.
Oh yeah, and that stress has lots of bad outcomes for your team. Poor leadership drives away your quality talent, and the longer you wait to fix the problem, the more talent you're going to lose and the more money you're going to lose.
With the Green Beret Leadership Program, you can use battle-tested leadership principles of the Green Berets to develop great leaders in your team faster than with the School of Hard Knocks. You'll see changes in just a few short weeks.
And the longer you wait to take action, the more damage poor leadership can do and will do to your business.
Learn more about the impact of GBLP, that's the Green Beret Leadership Program, can have on your business, and schedule your free coaching call with the Green Beret Coach. That's me, folks, Otis. Now at findyourpurpose.coach/GBLP. I'll say it again, findyourpurpose.coach/GBLP, or you can click the link in the description below.
Y'all, don't leave your team to struggle alone on their own. If you're not giving them the tools they need to be great, then they're not going to be great. You can't expect them to. So give them the tools they need to be successful.
How does Lara, the athlete, come into play? Because, taking care of yourself physically, that's important. But you describe yourself, and we talked about this a little bit when you and I first met, that competition and that sort of stuff and getting into it. How did that really come into play and dovetail with Lara, the CEO and the keynote speaker?
Well, it's a great question. I actually talk about this in my book as well. But the athlete side of who I am, it's a big part of who I am. It's how I start my day every single morning at the training center with my fellow athletes. And this is, again, the grit that I choose. So I continue to choose grit throughout my life. And I deliberately put myself through all this pain and suffering. And the very place I train at is called Suffer City, right? The very name itself might scare some people away. But it's true. I mean, we suffer every single day going through this grueling training, but I do it because I choose to do it. And I'm a huge believer in, if you don't look after your hardware, right, which is your body, you don't look after your hardware, how do you expect your software to work? And you wouldn't believe, because I am an executive coach as well. And so I have clients that are executives. And one of the first questions I ask is, well, how much water do you drink a day? It's astounding to me that, so many are walking around dehydrated, right? And then I ask, well, how much sleep are you getting? Oh my gosh, there's so many people that are sleep deprived. It's unreal. And this is a big thing. This is a big issue, right? I ask, okay, what's your nutrition like? Because so many people will eat processed foods these days. It's no good for you. It's no good for you. Why are you putting that into your body? If you want it to perform well, then give it good food that's going to help it perform, right? And then exercise. How much do you exercise? Are you getting your heart rate to a certain level? Now, I'm not necessarily saying you have to do what I'm doing every day and putting yourself through this real grueling grit, but choose what that grit looks like for you. Even if it's waking up and doing 5 push-ups, or waking up and doing 5 squats, 10 squats before you start your day, or going for a mile walk, or whatever that may look like, right? You have to choose to do it. And it then starts to become a habit. But it's going back to what I was saying. In fact, there is a fifth pillar as well, which I will tell you, my performance physio, because I'm a performance physio as well. She reminded me of that. And it's getting outside in the sunshine. Her name is Sarah Powell. She's amazing, by the way. But you get out into the sunshine, and just for 15 minutes, whether it's, drinking a glass of water out there, or drinking a coffee or tea, or whatever it is you want to have out there, getting out there for 15 minutes a day, and just, in the morning and then maybe in the afternoon, and getting that vitamin D. And if you don't have those 5 pillars, you may as well forget trying to perform at a high level, because you can't. You can't. You might think that you are, because you might be outperforming others, but actually you're missing a huge chunk of your potential. Because think about it, with a computer or a laptop, what happens if you don't charge it? It dies, right? Well, over time, if you don't charge it correctly, or you don't give it what it needs, and you are, abusing it in some manner, great, you get to upgrade it in 3, 4, 5 years. Well, you don't get to upgrade your body. You don't get to upgrade your body. So, I'm a huge, huge believer that you've got to look after your hardware to allow your software to work correctly. And, I often ask this question as well. I'm like, what is your brain? What is your brain? People look at me and say, what do you mean, what is your brain? What is your brain? What is it? It's an organ, right? It's an organ. So there's a lot of, information out there about how you can maintain a healthy heart, how you can, maintain healthy lungs, and all of this stuff. Well, what about the brain? The very thing that controls how you think, that controls your decision making, right? It's so, so crucial that when I hear executives or teams and they say, well, I have to, only sleep 5 or 6 hours because I've got so much to do during the day. I challenge them and I say, you know what? If you take 30 days and you drink a gallon of water a day, you eat well, and that's, I'm not a nutrition expert, but I have an incredible nutrition coach. So I, highly encourage anyone that really wants to take this seriously to do that. And, you work out whatever that may look like for you. It doesn't have to be grueling. It just needs to be something that's challenging to you, right? And then if you get 8 hours of sleep a night, just try that for at least 30 days. Just try one of them for at least 30 days, maybe do the sleep and the water together for 30 days. If the others just seem a little bit out of the reach right now, try one thing, maybe add another, do it for 30 days and see how you feel at the end of that 30 days. You'll notice a huge difference in how you make decisions, how you think. You're able to regulate your emotions. So when conflict may happen, whether it's within your team or outside of that, you're able to approach it in a way that's going to have a resolution that's going to be great for both parties, rather than just looking at it from your perspective, right? Or just looking at it from their perspective. You're actually going to come to a mutual agreement. And so the athlete in me, right, is the one that deliberately puts myself through that grit every single day, because I always want to be in that fear zone to get into my learning zone. When I'm in my comfort zone, I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to be in my comfort zone. I want to be like striving for that growth zone every single day. And, that's why I push my body to its limits, if you will, because then I want to be able to push past that and expand those limits. Mm-hmm. Because in doing so, and ensuring, obviously, I'm looking after my body as well. I've got to, there's a saying of you train harder, but you got to recover harder. It's very, very true. So you do have to listen to your body. You have to take care. I was recently injured. And so, I listen to my performance physio. I have to modify some of the movements right now. It's not going to be forever though. It's just in this moment. So you've got to learn how to be in tune with your body. And if you do all those things in 30 days, even if you, like I mentioned, just drink a gallon of water a day, and sleep 8 hours, give your brain what it actually needs, you'll be amazed at how clearer you'll be thinking, how much sharper you'll be. We can't expect to run on empty, and sleep and water, nutrition, exercise, and getting that vitamin D. If you don't do those things every day, you need to start doing them. And I'm telling you, you're going to see a huge, huge difference. Don't even try to do a course or anything else unless you're doing those 5 things, and see how you feel after 30 days.
That's such great advice. I love that, and the fact that you should test it, and what I learned was this fact that, because I'd never heard this before, and I really enjoy the way you put this. It's look after your hardware. I talk with people about that all the time. You got to take care of yourself so you can take care of others. But I really like that breaking it down, and in the world, in our technology world, that probably resonates really well. So if you take care of your hardware so the software can function, that's a great way of thinking about it. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Talking about grit, Angela Duckworth's book Grit was something I've read 2 or 3 times now. Really enjoy it, and it's really interesting. You talk about teaching grit, and I think it's like in the Q&A section. I don't think it's a whole chapter, but she talks about raising grit, like parenting grit, and it's really interesting seeing that applied to an adult, because we've talked about problem solving. It's really easy to be like, yeah, well, we'll just teach the next generation and I'll fix everything. It's like, no, there's people who need to learn it who are out there living right now. So I love the way you synthesize that and then improved upon it to make the system. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Laura,
absolutely.
how about you? What'd you learn?
I learned that sometimes technology can fail you, and but just to go with the flow, right? Just to go with the flow. But yeah, no, I just that obviously was great. There was times actually when you froze, and I actually couldn't quite understand what it was you were saying, and then I kind of caught the drift and just continued on. But that shows it's real, right? Authentic,
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we want. I think that something that I've really learned, whether it's through this and through all the work I do, and every time I'm speaking, whether that's on a podcast or whether it's on a stage, it just reinforces the fact of how important grit really is, and that it can be taught. And even though I have respect for Angela Duckworth with how she came up with passion and perseverance, I just wanted to push it further. Like, I want people to understand that you don't have to have passion and perseverance to have the grit, because some people have the passion but they don't know how to unlock that perseverance. They don't know how to unlock that grit. And yes, we can absolutely teach the next generation, but what about the people now? So that's why I came up with the grit system. And obviously every time I speak about it, it just fuels the fire even more. And I realized that, wow, this is something that just has to be out there in every single company, in every avenue of what you do in life. And that's actually something that I'm working on right now, is creating an app around this, so it can be instilled in every single person's life, but also within the company itself. And obviously they can go through the training and so forth. So it's something that I really truly believe is a necessity, especially with how the world is changing, and there's a lot of AI now, and it's almost like this war against AI and humans. And I look at it and say, well, we have something that AI doesn't, and that's the emotions, right? And so if we can harness the power of the emotions in people and combine it with the technology, think how incredible the world could be.
Awesome. How do folks find you, sign up to get that early release of your book?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's really simple and easy. This is the book right here. So they just have to text the word book, so BOOK, to 33777. So if you would like to, the book's going to be released in a few weeks. So if you'd like to be on the pre-order waitlist for that book, just text book to 33777, and you'll get access to the grit system, the grit type indicator. It's a lot of fun, to do that anyway. And also, there'll be some free giveaways as well in there that will be super fun for the first 50 readers actually. But yeah, make sure you're on that list, so then you can be notified of that. And
awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
This has been so great, and really appreciate you hanging out with us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, they can, and if anyone wants to find me on a social media platform, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. So yeah, well, I appreciate you guys for having me, and Thank you. Thank you so much.
One more glitch to get us out of here.
There you go. All right,
I don't.
Run us out.
Yeah.
It'll be good on the other side, right? Trust the process.
Okay, trust the process. Yeah. Absolutely. I don't know if you heard that, but they can connect the. I don't know if that was caught, but just text the word book to 33777, and then the audience can also connect with me on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, and thank you so much, Otis and Camden. I really appreciate you having me on the show, and maybe there'll be a part 2.
Yes, definitely.
That's right.
Sorry, I thought you were still going to throw it to me, Dad. I didn't want to mess up the process. Come on, trust the process means you throw it to me. Come on.
Camden.
Come on, otherwise I wouldn't be able to get it right. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of the Cam and Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Lara Jones, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at the Cam and Otis Show, and if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to share with other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.